A whiskey glass struck the bar 3 times. Then a pause. Then 2 more taps. Soft, almost lost under the piano. A cowboy in a dust-gray coat lifted his eyes from the rim of his cup and held very still. A bruised hand pulled back. A tray balanced on it. The woman behind the tray did not look at him. She walked away like nothing had happened. Most men in that saloon heard nothing. The cowboy heard everything. He set his cup down without a sound. He counted the men at the tables. He counted the doors. He counted the guns on the wall behind the bar. Who was she signaling for? The woman with the bruised cheek and the careful hands was called Hattie Mee Doyle. The cowboy did not know that yet. He only knew the signal. 3 taps. Pause. 2. Distress. Stay with me on this one. Calico Spur sat in a flat bowl of Arizona dust between 2 crooked hills. 1 street. 1 saloon. 1 livery. 1 Wells Fargo office that did more business in lies than in money. The miners came down out of the silver cut at sundown with grit packed into the creases of their hands, and their pay folded into thin paper envelopes. They cashed those envelopes inside the saloon. They drank inside the saloon. They left lighter than they came. Most of them did not count what was missing. They were too tired to count. The cowboy had ridden in at noon on a long-legged bay with 1 white sock. He tied the horse at the rail with a slow knot and stood a moment in the sun like a man who wanted the heat to remind him he was still alive. His name was Wade Carver. He had been an Army scout once, 10 years back in a country further north and colder. He carried a Colt on his right hip and a knife behind his belt and an old habit of watching doors before he watched faces. He did not wear a star. He had not worn one for a long time. He had been riding 9 days when he came down into Calico Spur. He was not looking for trouble. He was looking for a meal and a bed and a town he could leave in the morning without owing it anything. He found instead a bruise on a woman's cheek and a tap on a glass, and that was the end of leaving in the morning. He stepped inside the saloon, and the room took him in like dirty water taking in another stone. Nobody looked up for long. A piano played something slow and out of tune. A man with a thick neck stood at the end of the bar with his arms folded and his eyes on everything. A young one in a black vest sat with his back to the wall and his hand resting on a fancy pistol grip. Behind the bar, a tall man in a clean shirt poured drinks like a banker counting coins. That tall man was Reuel Brackett. He owned the saloon. He owned the back room. He owned more of Calico Spur than the men inside it knew. Wade asked for whiskey. He paid with a coin worn smooth. He did not drink it fast. He let it sit. He watched the room in the mirror behind the bar the way a scout watches a tree line. The thick-necked one was called Mose. The young one was called Cleve. There was a deputy in a corner with a tin star pinned crooked on his vest, sleeping off something. Wade marked them all. He marked the back room door. He marked the small window above it. He marked the woman with the tray. She moved careful. She moved like a person who had learned exactly how far a hand could reach. Her left cheek carried a yellow-green bruise 3 days old. Her wrist had a thinner mark, older, the shape of a man's grip. There was a split in her lower lip, healing, and a thin scar near her ear that was older than any of the rest. She kept her eyes low. She kept her voice low. She was thin in a way that meant she did not eat first. When she crossed in front of Brackett, he did not look at her. He did not need to. She already knew. She had been in Calico Spur 4 years. She had come west with a husband. The husband had died in the Silver Cut in a tunnel collapse in the 2nd year. Brackett had bought the husband's debts from the company store before the body was cold. The debt was on paper. The paper was in the back room. Hattie had been working that debt off ever since. She had done the arithmetic herself in the dark of her little upstairs room. By her count, she had paid the debt 3 times over. By Brackett's count, she still owed. Brackett kept the only book that mattered, and Brackett did not lose at arithmetic. She had learned the signal from her father. Her father had been a railroad telegrapher in Missouri before the war. He had taught her the codes when she was small. 3 short pause, 2 short. Distress. Need help. Send anyone. She had not used it in 20 years. She had not believed anyone in Calico Spur would know it. She had tapped it on the glass in front of the cowboy because she had liked his eyes, and because she had run out of other ideas, and because tomorrow was payday, and tomorrow she was probably going to die. She passed the cowboy's table on her second round, and her glass set down made that sound. 3 taps. Pause. 2. Wade did not flinch. He did not nod. He let his thumb tap the rim of his own cup once. Just once. Heard. She moved on. Brackett poured another drink and laughed at a miner's joke that was not funny. Wade sat in that chair for 3 hours. He drank 1 whiskey. He learned the shift. Mo stood until 8. The deputy woke at 9. Cleve never moved unless Brackett's chin moved first. The back room door opened twice. Both times Hattie came out carrying empty bottles, and the second time her hand was shaking. Wade saw the shake. Brackett saw him see it. Brackett's eyes did not change, but something behind them did. The night thinned out toward midnight. Miners drifted to their bunks. The piano stopped. Wade stood like a man who had drunk too slow and needed sleep. He paid for a room upstairs. He climbed the wooden stairs without hurry. He did not look back at Hattie. He did not need to. He had already decided. In his room, he sat in the dark with his back against the wall, and his boots off, and his Colt across his thigh. He listened to the floor below. He listened to the back room door. Round 2 in the morning, he heard a sharp, short cry, a sound a person makes when they have learned not to scream. Then a man's low laugh. Then nothing. Wade closed his eyes a moment and did not move. He was not asleep. He was counting again. He counted what he knew. 1 owner. 1 enforcer the size of a barn door. 1 pistolero with a fast hand and a slow brain. 1 sleeping deputy with a tin star and a probable bribe in his boot. 1 sheriff somewhere in the town who had let all of this happen for 3 years. 1 woman who had tapped a glass. He counted what he did not know. He did not know how many guns were in the back room. He did not know how many men in town owed Brackett money. He did not know what was in the ledger Hattie wanted him to see. He did not know whether the miners would side with their boss or with a stranger. Believe me, that last one mattered more than any of the others. A town that defends its own thief is a town that buries strangers in unmarked graves. He decided to wait 1 more day. He decided to learn the town in the daylight. He decided that if Hattie was still alive at sundown, he would move on payday and not before. And he decided 1 other thing. If Brackett laid a hand on Hattie between now and then, the schedule would change very fast. Morning came white and hot. Wade washed in a tin basin. He oiled his pistol. He went down for coffee. Hattie was already at the bar wiping glasses with a rag that was older than the bruise on her face. There was a fresh mark now along her jaw. She did not look at Wade. She set a cup in front of him. Coffee, no sugar. Under the cup, folded small, was a corner torn off a paper. He felt it before he saw it. He paid for the coffee. He slid the paper into his cuff. He drank slow. He read the note an hour later in the livery while pretending to check his horse's hoof. The handwriting was careful and small. 5 words. Back room. Ledger. Wage book. Help. He stood a long moment with the paper between 2 fingers and the smell of horse and hay around him. Then he tore the note into pieces small as snowflakes, and he fed the pieces to a tin lamp until they were ash. He spent the rest of the morning walking the town slow. He bought tobacco he did not need at the dry goods store and listened to 2 old men complain about the price of flour. He bought a tin of beans at the Wells Fargo office and watched the clerk write the sale in a thin book. He walked past the church and noted the back door and the height of the windows. He walked past the jail and noted the deputy still asleep on a cot inside. He walked past the back of the saloon and noted the alley and the side door and the small shuttered window above it. He counted 31 steps from the back door of the saloon to the church. He counted 24 from the church to the livery. He filed each number away the way a scout files water sources on a map of a country he might have to fight in. By noon he had the town in his head. By 1 he was back at the bar. He walked back to the saloon. He sat at the bar. He asked Brackett for a clean glass. He sipped water. He wiped his hands on a bar rag. He nodded to Brackett like a tired man heading to bed. He did not go to bed. He waited. The backroom door clicked shut behind Hattie. Then a single sharp slap. Then Brackett's voice low and flat. "You shouldn't have tapped that glass, girl." Wade was already moving. He did not kick the door. He turned the handle quiet and stepped through quiet, and what he saw he did not let his face show. Brackett had Hattie by the hair, her cheek pressed to a leather-bound book open on the table, his other hand raised. The room smelled of lamp oil and old coins. There was a strongbox under the table. There was a wage book open under her face. There were 3 years of stolen numbers in that book. Wade said one word. "Izzy?" Brackett turned without letting go of Hattie. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise. Then anger. Then the smooth mask of a man who sold lies for a living. He smiled. He let go of Hattie's hair. He stepped back from the table. He said something about a misunderstanding, and a girl who broke a glass, and a cowboy who should mind his coffee. Wade looked past him. He looked at the ledger. He looked at Hattie. Hattie's eyes were dry and they were burning. She did not need rescuing in the way a story sometimes pretends a woman does. She needed one fair witness. She needed one man who would not look away. Wade said, "Walk out the front, ma'am." Slow. Hattie walked. She did not hurry. She kept her chin up. She passed Mose at the bar and Mose moved to step in front of her and Wade said, "Mose, sit down." Mose looked at Brackett. Brackett's jaw moved once. Mose sat down. Wade backed out of the room with the door open and the ledger under his arm. He set the ledger on the bar. He set Hattie at the end of the bar, nearest the front door. He turned to Brackett and said, "Your deputy is on the porch. Call him in." Brackett did not call him in. Brackett smiled wider, and that was when Wade knew Brackett had already decided to kill them both before sundown. Wade had decided some things too. He let the false calm sit on the room for a long minute. He asked Brackett for another glass of water. Brackett poured it. The piano did not play. Mose did not move. The deputy on the porch did not move. Cleve was not in the room. Hattie's hand on the bar was steady now. The signal had been heard. The signal had been answered. The story did not end there. It was only starting. The back door clicked open. The sheriff stepped in. That was the trigger. That was the sound that turned the whole town. The sheriff was a wide man with a soft belly and a hard mouth, and a tin star polished so bright it looked guilty. His pistol was already half drawn. He did not look at Hattie. He looked at Wade. He said, "Drifter, set that book down and step away from the bar." Wade did not set the book down. Wade said, "Sheriff, this book is going to the territorial marshal in Prescott in about 6 hours." The sheriff's mouth tightened. Brackett's smile dropped 1 inch. "Now here's the thing. A corrupt town keeps itself corrupt because every man in it tells himself the other men want it that way. The sheriff thought the miners wanted cheap whiskey more than fair pay. Brackett thought the sheriff wanted the bribe more than the badge. The deputy thought nobody was watching. They were all wrong about each other, and they had been wrong for 3 years. Wade had been in town for 20 hours, and he already knew what they did not. The sheriff took 1 step forward. Wade laid 2 fingers on the ledger and said, "Before you draw, Sheriff, hear me. 40 miners come down off that cut at sundown. They have been short on every pay envelope since the spring of '81. 3 years. Some weeks $2. Some weeks 5. It is all written down in this book in Brackett's own hand. If I walk out of here with this book, those miners learn the truth tonight. If you shoot me, somebody else walks out with it tomorrow. Either way, the book leaves this town. The only question is whether you leave with it or under it. The sheriff's hand did not move from his pistol, but it did not move toward it either. Brackett spoke fast and low. "Sheriff, the man is bluffing." Wade said, "I am not bluffing. I am tired. There is a difference." The sheriff looked at Brackett. The sheriff looked at the ledger. The sheriff looked at Hattie's bruised cheek. Something old and small and almost dead moved behind his eyes. He did not draw. He did not step back either. He just stood there breathing. That was when Cleve walked in from the alley with his fancy pistol already in his hand. Cleve was 22 years old and he had killed 2 men, and he thought that made him 3. He came in fast through the side door with the pistol up and his eyes on Wade. He did not see Hattie reach under the bar. He did not see the short shotgun she came up with. He did not see Wade step left while he was still pulling the trigger. Cleve's first shot went into the ceiling. His second shot did not happen. Wade was already on him. It was not a duel. The penny novels lie about duels. It was a short thing in a small space. Wade caught Cleve's wrist with his left hand and broke it against the door jamb in one motion, and Cleve's pistol fell, and Wade drove his elbow into Cleve's throat, and Cleve went down on his knees coughing. Wade picked up the pistol. He stepped back. Cleve stayed on his knees. The whole thing took maybe 4 seconds. The piano player, who had crept back in to watch, did not breathe for any of them. Wade put Cleve's pistol on the bar next to the ledger. He said, "Sheriff, that one is yours to arrest or yours to bury. Your choice." The sheriff looked at Cleve on the floor. He looked at the deputy on the porch through the open door. He looked at Brackett. He took his hand off his own pistol. He said, "Son, get up." Cleve got up. The sheriff cuffed him. "If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. It tells me the quiet kind of justice still matters to somebody." Now back to that saloon, because the worst of the night had not started yet. Brackett had not moved through any of it. He stood behind the bar with his clean shirt in his banker's hands, and he watched Wade the way a snake watches a boot. He said, "Drifter, you have made yourself a problem." Wade said, "No. You made yourself a problem in 81. I am just the man who showed up to read about it." Brackett's hand drifted towards something under the bar. Hattie's shotgun lifted 1 inch. Brackett's hand drifted back. Mo stood up. He was a head taller than any man in the room, and his shoulders filled the doorway behind him. He did not draw. He cracked his knuckles. He came at Wade slow, the way a bull comes at a fence. Wade did not back up. He stepped into him. He hit Mose once in the throat with the edge of his hand, and once in the gut with the butt of Cleve's pistol, and once across the temple with the barrel, and Mose went down in 3 pieces. He did not get up. Wade did not look at him after. The deputy on the porch heard the noise and made his choice. He chose wrong. He came through the front door with his pistol drawn, and his eyes on Hattie, because he had been told for 3 years that Hattie was the easy target. Hattie's shotgun was already on his chest. She did not fire. She said, "Drop it." He dropped it. She said, "Sit down on that floor." He sat down on that floor. Wade kicked his pistol behind the bar. The sheriff watched all of it and did not move, and that was when Wade understood the sheriff had finally, in his soft, tired way, picked a side. Not Wade's side. Just not Brackett's anymore. Some days that is the side that matters. Sundown came. The miners came down off the cut. They came in their dust and their long shadows and their tired, careful walks, and they smelled the air outside the saloon, and they knew something was different before they knew what. There was a horse at the rail they did not know. There was a sheriff on the porch with no smile. There was a woman standing in the doorway with a shotgun across her arms and her chin up, and her bruise plain in the last gold light. Hattie said, "Come inside. Bring your pay envelopes." Every one. They came inside. 41 men. They stood 3 deep along the bar. Wade lifted the ledger and set it open on the bar in front of them. He did not speak. Hattie spoke. Her voice was small at first, and then it was not small. She read names. She read dates. She read numbers. She read 3 years of $2 here and $5 there, and $100 in one bad month, and a man's whole month of wages gone in one line written in Brackett's own neat hand. The room got very quiet. The miners looked at their envelopes. They looked at Brackett. They looked at each other. A man in the back said, "That is my name on April of '82. Hattie said, "Yes." A man at the front said, "That is $12 I never saw." Hattie said, "Yes." A young miner with red dust in his beard said, "My boy died that winter because we could not pay the doctor." Hattie did not say yes to that. She just looked at him. The young miner started crying without sound. The man next to him put a hand on his shoulder. Brackett tried to speak. Wade said no. Brackett tried again. Wade said sign. He set a pen and an inkpot in front of Brackett. He had written 4 lines on a clean sheet of paper. A confession. Plain words. I, Reuel Brackett of Calico Spur, did willfully steal from the pay of the miners of the Silver Cut Mine in the amounts written in this ledger, between the years of 1881 and 1884. I return this stolen pay to the men named herein. I submit myself to the territorial marshal at Prescott. Brackett looked at the paper. He looked at Wade. He looked at 41 miners. He picked up the pen. His hand shook. He signed. The miners did not cheer. They did not shout. They stood there breathing. One of them, the foreman, took the ledger and the confession in his own scarred hands and held them like he was holding the bones of his own father. He nodded at Hattie. He nodded at Wade. He said one word. Obliged. Then the foreman turned around, and the miners turned around with him, and they took the saloon apart with their bare hands. Not for fun. Not for rage. For work. They pulled down the bar. They smashed the rigged scale Brackett had used to weigh out their pay in coin. They pulled out the strongbox and opened it with a pickaxe and counted out the silver inside and laid it on the broken bar in stacks. They paid themselves what the ledger said they were owed. They paid the widow of the young miner's boy first. They paid the foreman last. The sheriff stood in the doorway through all of it. He did not stop them. He did not help them. When they were done, he walked Brackett out in handcuffs of his own and put him in his own jail and locked the door and sat down at his own desk and wrote a telegram to the territorial marshal in Prescott with a hand that was not quite steady. He wrote his own resignation underneath it. He put both pages in the same envelope. The piano player came back at some point. He played something slow and in tune for the first time anyone could remember. Dawn came pale and pink over the eastern hill. Hattie sat on the steps of the tin-roofed church with the ledger across her knees and a clean shawl around her shoulders and a cup of coffee in her hand that nobody had charged her for. Her bruise looked worse in the new light. Her eyes did not. She watched the street wake up. Wade saddled his bay at the livery in the cool blue before the sun. He cinched slow. He checked the hooves. He did not hurry. The foreman came down the street with his hat in his hand. He had a small leather pouch. He held it out. Wade did not take it. He said, "Pay the widow more." The foreman put the pouch back in his coat. He said, "Where will you go?" Wade said, "North." The foreman said, "Will you stay?" Wade said no. The foreman nodded once like a man who had expected that answer and respected it anyway. Wade walked the bay down the street toward the church. He stopped in front of the steps. Hattie stood up. She did not come down. He did not come up. He took off his hat. She said, "I never asked your name." He said, "Wade." She said, "Mine is Hattie." He said, "I know." She almost smiled. The light caught the bruise and forgave it nothing, and yet she looked like a woman who would never again be touched the way she had been touched 2 days ago. She said, "Why did you stay?" He said, "You tapped a glass." She said, "A lot of men would not have heard." He said, "A lot of men do not listen." She held the ledger up a little. She said, "This stays here." He said, "Good." She said, "I am keeping the saloon." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "What will you call it?" She said, "The Honest Glass." He almost smiled then too. He put his hat back on. He swung up onto the bay. He did not say goodbye. He nodded once. She nodded once. He turned the horse and rode slow up the street past the broken saloon, and past the jail with Brackett's clean shirt, now dirty inside it, and past the Wells Fargo office, where the foreman was already setting up a fair pay table for the new month. The miners on the porch lifted their hats as he passed. He lifted his hat back. He did not look back after that. A drifter who looks back is a drifter who comes back, and Wade Carver had learned a long time ago that some towns need to do their own healing without him watching. Had he watched him until he was a small dusk-gray shape against the pale hills, and then she sat back down on the church steps with the ledger across her knees. She opened it to a clean page near the back. She took a stub of pencil from her shawl. She wrote one line at the top of that page in her careful small hand. First honest day. Then she wrote the date. Then she closed the book and held it against her chest, and she sat in the new sun and she did not cry, because she had cried enough already, and because the work of the day was waiting, and because the bruise on her cheek was already, in the very particular way of bruises, beginning to fade. The town did not become a paradise. Towns do not. There was still dust in the street, and there were still arguments at the Wells Fargo window, and there was still a man in the jail, and there would be a trial in Prescott in the autumn, and there would be hard winter ahead. But the pay envelopes came out fat that next Friday, and they stayed fat the Friday after. The widow of the young miner's boy took her share and bought a milk goat and a sack of seed, and put a fresh white sheet over the small grave on the hill. The piano in the saloon was rebuilt out of the broken parts, and the new bar was made of pine, instead of the dark wood Brackett had ordered from St. Louis, and the back room was turned into a small library with a stove, because the foreman's daughter had learned to read and wanted other children to learn too. The sign over the door said The Honest Glass, and below that, in smaller letters, all welcome, no debt to the house. The sheriff did not stay sheriff. The territorial marshal came up from Prescott 2 weeks later and read both pages of his telegram and his resignation, and took Brackett away in a wagon with iron bars on the back. The marshal looked at the sheriff a long moment and said only, "You got there in the end." The sheriff looked at the ground. The marshal rode away. The next sheriff was the foreman, elected by every miner in the cut, and he wore the tin star polished but not too polished, the way an honest man wears something he is still learning how to deserve. Hattie kept the ledger on a high shelf behind the bar where every miner could see it. She added an honest line every payday. She paid herself a fair wage and not a coin more. She sent letters east to her sister in Missouri, and the letters were longer every month. The bruise on her cheek faded yellow, then green, then gone, and the thinner mark on her wrist faded too, and the scar near her ear stayed because some marks do, and she stopped flinching when men reached past her for a glass somewhere around the first frost. Wade Carver was not seen in Calico Spur again. There were stories, of course. There always are. A man with a long-legged bay and one white sock was seen up near the Mogollon Rim that fall. A drifter matching his description broke up a fight in a Colorado saloon the next spring with 2 words and a look. Stories? Maybe true. Maybe not. The kind a country tells itself about the kind of men it wishes it had more of. Hattie did not chase the stories. She did not need to. She had heard the part she needed. 3 taps. Pause. 2. A man across a saloon who looked up. A man who counted doors before he counted faces. A man who stayed. 3 taps. Pause. 2. A glass on a bar. A cowboy who listened. A town that finally, after 3 years of looking away, looked at itself in the mirror behind the bar and did not look away. That is the whole of it. That is what happened next.